Okay, it's time to try starting to assemble the HM-01. It looks like, actually the first thing I need to do is make a plan. As you can see, this ignition wire sticks below the base a little bit, and I don't want to bend that the wrong way and have it break, so I'm gonna get out the pad from the bottom of the shipping container. Because it's got a hole right there. Although I think, nope, the lower pad here is a better plan. Okay, so we'll have to think this through to get this to assemble, since we don't have any instructions. Flywheel is probably going to be close to the last thing, but I think the first thing I will do is set the piston and look through all these bags to see what other parts I have. So that is the detent arm and pin. That is, it looks like the exhaust rocker, the pull start handle and string, which I'm going to just toss back in the box because we don't need it, the piston and connecting rod, and it's got the split bearings. Oh, and there's a key on these bearings. Interesting. So, yeah, it looks like there's also a key spot in the connecting rod. So let's get those out, and you can see that little notch there to key on the bearing, and then there is a matching notch in the housing here, so that, you know, when we put these in place, they're going to be held so they can't spin on the crankshaft, and they'll actually do their job better. The other engines have brass bushings on the connecting rod, but they're not keyed to the push rod, so sometimes they can rotate, which isn't a huge deal, but it can result in some weird wear patterns. So I don't have a magnet. I was going to bring a magnet to check and see if this is aluminum or something. The piston's definitely aluminum, and inside the piston you can see the tiny black dot is a set screw to retain the connecting rod pin, the wrist pin here, side to side, so it won't slide and score the piston or the cylinder lining, which is fantastic. But I can feel that this is a little dry in there, and I'm not going to remove that wrist pin since it's got set screws in it. But I am, because I brought my oil in from the garage, gonna just oil that thoroughly while we set that aside and look at the rest of what's in this box. There is the tiny oiler. That is very pretty and very functionally made, it looks like. There we go. I may, like this adjuster is not a lot of friction on that, so I don't know, we'll see, but it's got a little cover for the fill hole there. And so it looks like that's going to be very cool to have operating. Another fantastic feature on this engine. Yeah. And then we've got our main bearing caps and the oil cups for those. Let's see, this must be the push rod, and it's got a spring with it. That might be a return spring for the push rod to help make sure that the exhaust valve has a chance to is guaranteed to open. 2 springs, the short one for the, looks like it's set for the governor balls already, and I don't know what this long section of spring is. They may have just, oh yeah, the end here is cut. I don't know how well we can see that. The end is cut from this long section, so they custom cut a piece of spring and they included the remains of the spring stock they cut it off of. So if you get the kit and it comes like mine did with this spare piece of spring, you'll be able to make custom springs for your governor. And then you don't have to stretch. You can just make a new spring to be looser or stiffer. Let's see now. Can I get this to focus? I have the macro lens on my new camera and I'm trying that out. So hopefully when I do this I can get it to focus real close here. The camshaft here, or the cam gear here rather, it's a cam gear, has timing marks on it. 1 dot and a 2 dot next to the teeth, so that it will be easier to time it, which is very nice. So I gotta look at my, so the cam has this flat, which is the exhaust valve closed, and then the half lift that triggers the ignition, and then 2 dots at the beginning of the exhaust stroke part of the lobe. So this section raises the push rod to open the exhaust, and that must be top dead center, that one punch for the exhaust, and then it drops off really quickly down here, right? Yeah, and then there's this flat again for the intake stroke. So, but having the pin punches on there for the timing is nice. Let's see, this bag here is the fuel mixer, and what else is this? So, a fuel mixer, it's got a it's got a choke, and then the needle on the top, and it is very stiff. So, well, I did watch Thomas PC Guru's video about his pre-assembled one, and I am going to do the same thing he did, which is put oil on the needle, and that is a big fat needle for this engine. The other engines have much finer needles. Okay, and there we go. It's stiff enough that it felt like it cross-threaded, and so I had to back it up. If you're worried you're cross-threading these stiff little brass things, always remember to back up, turn it backwards until you feel the first thread click down in, and then you'll know they're lined up properly and you can gently turn it in. So, but yeah, that needle is quite stiff, and it looks like it was a steel needle. Yep, you can see the steel needle is pressed through this brass cap, so I think it was the needle is maybe a little crooked in there, and that's why it's stiff. But that is fine as long as the needle is seating nicely. And this choke is just threaded on here. And it's open, and it's got a hole in the side of it, so you can use this as a secondary mixture adjustment if you really, if the needle is not giving me fine enough adjustment, I'll be able to turn the choke, and with that hole there, we'll know that it's that'll be a way to change the mixture. Also, I would bet that with this much air going in on the, because it's got that lever to switch modes from hit and miss to full open operation, I would bet that with all of that air flowing in, it will overspeed, and during the open operation, you want to close the choke here so that it's only drawing air through the tiny pinhole. But we will experiment that when the engine when it's running. Right now, that is a nice looking little fuel mixer. The rest of this box or container has the flywheel center locks. So these are tapered, and they will work like the HM-01. They fit in the flywheel like this, and then we'll have 3 screws and tighten them in, and as they press in, they'll lock onto the flywheel, and then I just gently push that in, or lock onto the crankshaft, Okay, this is still going in there. Alright. Then I can leave that in place and not worry about it. Oh, I will have to get it out. Oops, because I didn't line my screw holes up. Well, we'll worry about that when we get to putting the flywheels on. That one I dropped in place and made sure I lined my screw holes up. So, flywheels go to the side. Here's that bit of emery cloth that they included for helping polish. And this is the high tension lead and the ground lead. And there's a crimp connector for the ground, which I don't see a good spot to connect that on the base, so I don't think I think that'll be a spare part. And then this is a copper gasket. Oh, that's the deal. This copper gasket has the tab that this ground can connect onto. And that copper gasket goes here on the intake. So this copper gasket is a clever way to move the ground very close to the head for the ignition. That way, if you, for some reason when you assemble it, don't have a good ground from the head through the case to, say, a ground point on the body, you won't have, it'll, reduce those problems. Okay, so that was one bag. Oh, this says measuring rod right on it. So I don't know what this measuring rod is going to be for, but we've got measuring rod. Next bag here. This is laser cut 0.15 millimeter. I will guess that this is the feeler gauge for setting the valve clearances, because 0.15 millimeter is a very common valve clearance. A couple of O-rings. One of these is a spare piston ring. And it says 20 by 2 millimeters and 25 by 1.5. So I assume this other bigger ring, the smaller one, is this 20 by 2 millimeter for the piston. The bigger one, I assume, is an O-ring for inside the casting here to seal the steel cylinder liner to the casting if I discover that one of those is bad. So, let's see. A pair of 3 by 6 millimeter cap screws. The lag bolts marked special screws for the base, which I did not order a base, so I don't have something to screw those to. This bag is marked 2.5 by 6. This one is 2.5 by 16, so it looks like it's a lot of 2.5 millimeter screws. And the stainless steel ball, there are what, 3, 4, there are 9 in here, so I'm guessing there's so I'll have to figure out where the ball bearing race is for those. and then 2mm by 6mm screws. So, alright, let us start seeing about putting this together. It looks like we've got everything. I think that we'll take a minute and yeah, be right back. Alright, so we laid all our parts out. I think the first step is going to be putting the piston in and then setting the crankshaft behind it. And I have my tool roll off to the side here. We'll find out what out of the tool roll we need. So the wrist pin is set with set screws, but I am going to take the bearing cap off. Has it been marked? It has not been marked, but I am assuming it was assembled in order, so I'm going to get my tiny file here, and there, freshly file across the parting line so that I've got a shiny new mark versus the other side. So marked that to match it. And that file, I don't know where it came from. I'm guessing it is an old point file for ignition work in old cars. We've got 2mm cap screws holding the connecting rod cap on. So, and then let's look inside there. It looks like there's assembly lube or something inside there, so we'll just get a rag and wipe inside, not because we'll wipe inside to make sure that we get anything extra that's stuck to that assembly lube out. Put a drop of oil thoroughly on the O-ring there for the piston ring, and gonna twist, make sure my mark is on top for when I put the rod in. Slowly work that in. I got plenty of oil in there. I'll just push it all the way in to the other end. That is a pretty stiff fit in there, even though I put a ton of oil on it. So we'll see how that goes once we get it in place more. Here's the crankshaft. They put one of the bearings is in place from when they assembled it and tested it. It's got the cam gear. The drive gear for the cam is pressed in place, and then there's a snap ring right there, tiny snap ring. So yeah, they left that assembled when they disassembled it to ship it as a kit. So here is the other main bearing. It's brass, and it's got this collar on one side. The collar for this bearing is against the crankshaft, so I'm just get some oil all over that and try to work it in there, and the other side we can just oil the crankshaft directly. That way. Turn it as we put it in place. And now you see there's an oil hole here. I'm going to match those oil holes and line them up and set this in place. Snapped in place right like so. And the main caps I want that oil hole to be under the oil hole in the main cap. So this one looks good. And then I have to figure out which side these main caps go on, because I think the holes are so the hole on the end here is slightly off center. You can see on the machine side much more easily. There's also a notably rounded corner here. This corner is less rounded than that one. So on the base here, this rounded side is the outside of the bearing cap. So this is that rounded corner. That's the outside. And I need this to rotate Actually, I've got toothpicks. Nope, that's not gonna. Alright, and this is the one for that. Nope, and I over-rotated this pinhole for the oil, so I need to pull this out. Get both of these holes lined up, and then there. Nope. Both holes held. My fingers here holding those holes in place and then pressing down. There we go. And that bearing cap has the rounded edges that match here, and this bearing cap has the rounded edges that match here. And if we peer down in there, we can see through this hole and through the brass hole. The oil hole in the brass is matched. So we are ready with these 4 small screws, I believe, to put the main bearing caps on. Just get them in and get them snug. And I realize I've got the ball nose 2mm driver, which makes it a little easier to get these started because you don't have to be exactly on, and when you're gently turning backwards to get the thread to start, a straight side will hold the fastener pointed the wrong way, and the ball nose lets the screw orient itself to the threads a little easier. Alright, now that those are in place, I am just snugging them down a little bit. Alright, not super tight, they're just snug. And this does not turn at all. Okay. If I loosen these, nope. Alright, so this should definitely be turning, and it is not. So take all the screws out. Bearing cap, bearing cap. Alright, that main bearing turns. That main bearing turns. Set this in place and it turns pretty well, which means I need to we're back to rotate our 2 oil holes so that they're in matched up in line, and set that in place. Still turns pretty good. And then we'll put 1 cap on. See what happens. with a little bit of running, this will all, you know, bed in and work nicer. But first things first, it still has to turn. Oh, and as soon as we get the bearing cap in place, it won't turn. Alright, I need to get... Alright. Yeah, okay, so with just the just loosely set in here, this turns, but as soon as you press the main bearings into the casting isn't bored straight, and the main bearings suddenly get very tight. So I am going to get I'm going to get my Dremel tool out, and first it feels like this was all machined and there were no chamfers to break the edges in the journals here. So I'm going to get my Dremel and lightly break the edges in here, and that will also, so you can see these are dirty. Well, yep, I'm gonna go get my Dremel and just lightly break the edges on these machined corners on the lower side here. And I think that will be enough. Alright, so we need to break these edges on the journal on the bottom side here, and I have a Dremel and a sanding tool, and the sanding drum is just fatter than the journal, which is going to make it ideal for just dusting across that corner. So it's dusted around the corner on the inside, and I can feel that it has knocked off all of the little burrs that were there. And now we will go to one of these Scotch-Brites. And that is going to polish that inside corner. Hopefully, with even that tiniest bit of polishing, I'm gonna get a rag rag and wipe that out. Yeah, hopefully with that tiniest bit of polishing in that space, we will now be able to set the crank, which spins like this, and then press in, and it's stiffer, but it turns now that it's pressed in. Cool. Alright, so gonna line up our drip holes in the bearings there and hold them in place, and then should be able to, yep, get that cap on. And loosely in place, and check that it spins still. And if you're assembling yours and you don't have a Dremel, that inside edge that I deburred to get this to loosen up, just the teeniest bit there, like, you can go at that with a file or just anything you've got that will barely take the edge off on the inside. So, yep. However, we're back at not turning, so yep, definitely having an issue here on these main bearing fits. So I don't know, clearly the engine was assembled and tested, so I don't know if they assembled and tested these and then ended up packing the parts in different orders and mixing them up between engines after they were tested. But this one, when I put the caps on, this is not working out. I'm going to see about, let's see, if we put this crank in backwards, does it rotate? So if I put the crank in backwards and it turns, then I can remove the cam gear and trade the two main bearing shells, and that should fix this. So I'll put our nope, does not fix that problem. So switching the main bearings will not work. Alright, well, that's the first obstacle on the assembly here, is that the main bearings are way too tight. And when you put the caps in, they are, yeah. Yeah. What can I do about that? Like, I don't have a line boring tool of any kind, so I don't have a way to put these caps in and line, caps on and line bore this properly. And like, that's definitely too stiff for this engine to operate. So let me give some thought to this, because obviously if I just go nuts and put Well, let's try it. Alright, we're going to try something else. I think, nope. You cannot trade the bearing caps. Left to right and have the hole come out in the right spot. But if I turn this over, this is the left-hand bearing cap upside down. But nope, that also is too tight. So, first big obstacle. The main bearings are incorrectly sized in some capacity. I'm gonna go with the caps here have been improperly machined because, like I said, this feels nice when it's rotating loose in here. The brasses, when I rotate them, feel good. So I need to figure out a way to put these caps in place and bore through here without, yeah. I need to, find a way to put these caps in place and bore through them to open this hole up and realign this hole properly. So first we'll put these caps on and just inspect to see if it looks like these caps are the ones that may have would bored with this base, or if it was just a random assortment of caps that I got. So alright, the caps are in place, and the paint color doesn't match quite right, but I'm trying to feel in here. It does feel smooth in there, so these were either these were bored with the engine to match, or they are being manufactured very precision, at least on that side. On this side, there's definitely a visible misalignment on this side in here. So this cap is vertically like that, and you can see that very visible line in here from the misalignment on this bearing cap. And this one, oh yeah, this one is also misaligned. So these caps were not bored with this engine. That's why it suddenly clamps when you tighten them down. And there is a big piece of flashing from this machining here. So, alright. What can be done about this boring issue on these caps? While I think about that, I'm going to just use my little file to push that there, that machining flash down to pop that off the edge there. I, again, do not have any machine tools, so I certainly cannot set this up and properly line bore through these caps to get this to line up. So that is quite disappointing because, like I said, I'm pretty sure they test ran these, but obviously after they test ran them, they disassembled the ones that were going to be kits and did not immediately pack them, but instead mixed the parts up in some capacity. So clearly these caps wouldn't have, if this engine had been pre-assembled and tested, these caps would not have allowed this engine to run because it's just too tight. Yeah. Now I could do a couple of foolish things. I have the stone. I could just put my Dremel in with the stone and grind against the gaps, the seams here where the two caps fit, to try and, even that out. That would make these holes oval, but the brass main bearings in here do fit well enough that even if these cap holes were oval, as long as they let the engine align itself, it would be okay. And I think I'm trying to think about what else I have for options here, again, because I don't have access to a lathe or anything, so I can't line bore this properly. And obviously once I do this, that is going to be like no going back, basically. So yeah. I think that's going to be it. This stone in the Dremel, very carefully, I'm going to grind and test fit until the crankshaft rotates properly. Okay. And you could hear as the engine, or as the Dremel turned, you could hear as the Dremel turned when it caught the seam here where it was uneven. And I am really worried I'm gonna bend this or break this wire, so I'm gonna loosen that and turn it to the side. There. Okay, the ignition wire turned to the side, so I'm not doing that. Now, lightly ground inside those caps, and this is the tedious part. We need to then remove the caps, thoroughly wipe everything out, and then test the fit of the main bearings. So, caps, screws, there we go. Mains still spin. Make sure we get these caps on left and right. Still spins after pressing in. Alright, one side snugged. Nope. Alright. There. All right. Well, this is gonna take a while, so okay. As you can see, I finally have the crankshaft turning with the bearing caps in place. That was about an hour of very carefully using my flat Dremel grinder here and putting the caps on, running this around the inside on either side very gently, cleaning it, or pulling the caps off, cleaning it, deburring it, putting the crankshaft in place, and checking to see until it turned. And now it is turning. So, it fit together. I have fixed the fitment on these bearing caps with the tool that I have available. And now I'm going to take this apart and we will have to clean it very thoroughly because there is garbage all over the base from the grinding. So I'm going to take this and wash it and then continue assembling. Okay. I don't know what happened there. I thought I was videoing, but it did not. I must not have hit the button. My camera slept while I was grinding on my crankshaft. So, as you can see, the bearing caps are in place. The crankshaft is rotating with the bearing caps in place. I was very gently grinding with my Dremel and my flat grinding stone on the inside. Spent about an hour grinding, cleaning, fitting. So take the caps off, crankshaft out, caps in, grind, caps off, clean, fit the crankshaft until it turns like this. Now it is time to get the piston fit, and the bearings have, the bottom end bearing has a key on it so that the halves will not spin. However, I'm finding that currently, with the file mark to match the cap to the connecting rod lined up and on top, the engine is not turning. So I'm rotating, and now my file mark for the connecting rod is on the bottom, and that means that the key here on the piston is on the bottom, and let's see, file mark on the bottom. So my two bearing halves are in place, and keyed in, and then there we go. Make sure that we start the threads properly on the end, or on the bearing cap, and then so you'll note that I'm still, like, I'm doing it quickly, but I rotate the screw anti-clockwise, counterclockwise until I feel the thread catch, and then I start the screw, because on these fine threads you definitely don't want to accidentally cross-thread them, which can be very easy. Alright, the strap is fastened in place. Okay, and this is very stiff, but it turns. I very carefully put the file mark to match this in case it was machined together. But as we discovered from the main bearing caps, there is a non-zero chance that this was just assembled from an assortment of parts. And so let's flip the cap and find out if that results in a better fit. So key the bearing in place, and there's my file mark. My file mark is now intentionally mismatched. Thought I felt it there. There we go. All right. Those are snug. Nope. All right, so that is the best fit. The file marks facing down were the best fit for this. And I think, because it turns but it's a bit stiff, that means it will bed in and wear itself into alignment. But key matched in the bearing, and there's my file mark. So file mark is down again. Put our screws in gently. Pour plenty of oil over this joint. We'll wiggle it around, make sure that it gets in there. There we go. And tighten those in. Alright. Those are snug, and it turns, but it's a little stiff. However, we'll take it. I think the oil hole moved on this main bearing here. So, pop that cap off and, yep, the oil hole moved. That is not where that screw goes, but get that oil hole back in place for the main bearing. See how long it stays there. Yeah. Drip more oil in there because we can. All right. Okay. So, crankshaft in place, the piston and crank main bearing, or bottom end here is a bit stiff, but I think it's gonna work its way in because brass is like that. And next, let's find out what let's see about getting the cam gear in place, because that's going to fit in here like this against that roller. And it's got those stamps which are on the inside, and it's got a single stamp on the outside here too. Alright, let's see, what do we have? This must be the shaft that the cam rides on. So, we've got this shaft, which has a flat in it, and then there's a set screw in pre-installed in the body here. So we can take the camshaft here, and let's see now. We're rotating. This is the top of the camshaft, and that flat is the intake stroke. And I don't know what these timing marks are for. If here the intake stroke is the lowest point, but the timing mark is over on this side. Let's see now. That's bottom dead center. Let us try this pin. I'm going to use this timing mark 1 as bottom dead center. So the engine is at bottom dead center, and we're going to slip our shaft in place and lift the lifter. Oh, I found it, or I see it. There is a pair of timing marks on the small gear as well. So we can just rotate those two timing marks around. So the 2 timing marks are on the teeth there, and there. 1 punch, 2 punches, and take our tool and push the slide in, and run out of fingers. There we go. There. So you can see the 1 punch and the 2 punches on the small gear lined up. That should be in time. So we followed the timing marks and put the cam gear in place, and now I'm tightening this set screw that was in the body. And I think there. Put a drop of oil behind there. And tighten the set screw on the flat. And now that should be the valve gear in place. Alright. The other thing that was in the bag there was the detent arm, and that needs to fit into the collar from the governor, and there's a key slot milled here and a key slot milled in the governor collar here, but I don't think that's necessary, although I bet that key slot will take a ball bearing or two. That might be one of the locations the ball bearings go. Let me yeah, because that feels like it would love a ball bearing underneath it. Let's try that. I have an assortment of the tiny steel balls here. So we'll just get out the forceps and carefully place one. Okay. There we go. Oh, let's put two in there. There. And a drop of oil in with them. Oh yeah. A little drop of oil and two ball bearings under there, and that slides beautifully. And then this pin goes on the inner race there. And get that lever out of the way. But it occurs to me I did not bring my tiny screwdrivers. I got my other tool set, but I did not bring the tiny screwdriver box. So, we got that in place. Time to find the tiny screwdrivers. Alright, I got my screwdriver. However, I realized that because the flywheel assembly here, they pressed the pins through these weights. You cannot, like, there's no screw hole in these pins, so there's no way to get this flywheel on without this collar being slipped entirely out, which it can't do when you put the detent lever in. So the assembly order for this is to get the flywheel ready, put this collar in place on these knobs, put the collar in place here, and then have the ball bearings ready to slip into the collar as you assemble it. So I have the clamp in place, but I'm gonna remove that. Just give it a little press from the inside so that pops out. And then I've got the crankshaft to turn around so the ball bearings are on top. And I'm slipping this out. And there. Ooh, and I got it straight right back on, so the ball bearings stayed in place. Excellent. Now, we'll tip the whole engine up on its side. Take this clamping piece, set it in place, and this is the screw size that I have a ton of and looks to be about right, so these are going to be the screws we put in there, but I'm not going to tighten this flywheel down until I finish assembling the governor. So 3 of the 2x6 screws. They're just click. Oh, there we go. That's where the thread fell in place. Alright, those are in place, very loose. You can see, not holding anything. Now, this lever has to slip in here. And get the use the forceps here. So flip this on its side again. Slip the lever down in there. And okay. To make this go, we need to loosen the set screw that detains the that. I use this to rotate that shaft, and now the detent arm can slip in until it gets far enough forward for the pin on the back of it to slip into the collar here. Now that's sort of in place. We need to set this screw back in place, and I'm wobbling it to make sure the flat is flat properly there. And then the pin goes in from the top. And that was the thread going in, so we can tighten it down. Alright. Now the governor is in place. So the balls move that collar, and that collar moves this. And then we'll have to determine what the spacing for the flywheel needs to be before we tighten it.